My name is Nellie Meyer, and for a long time, I thought I was the kind of woman who could recognize danger before it reached her front door. I was wrong. Ethan Brooks and I had been together for 6 years. Not married, not yet, but close enough that people stopped asking when we would move in together and started asking when we were finally going to make it official. We had built the kind of life that looked steady from the outside. Shared bills, shared holidays, shared grocery lists stuck to the fridge with magnets from places we promised we would visit again. For years we worked. Not perfectly, no couple does. We had stupid arguments about laundry, about money, about whether ordering takeout 3 nights in a row counted as resting or giving up. But underneath all of that, I believed we were solid. Ethan knew how I liked my coffee when I was too tired to speak. I knew when he was pretending not to be anxious because his left hand would tap against his knee. We had rhythm, history, inside jokes that made no sense to anyone else. That was why, when things started changing, I tried so hard not to see it. It began with his phone. Before, Ethan used to leave it everywhere, on the couch, on the bathroom counter. Once, he left it inside the fridge because he was carrying groceries and talking at the same time. But about 6 months ago, his phone became something he guarded like a secret. He took it to the kitchen, to the laundry room, even to throw out the trash. One evening, I laughed and said, "What are you doing? Running a secret spy agency?" He smiled too quickly. "No, work's just been annoying lately." 2 days later, he added a password. Ethan had never cared about passwords before. I asked him about it while we were brushing our teeth. "Since when do you lock your phone?" He shrugged without looking at me. "Security stuff, hackers, you know." I didn't know, but I nodded anyway because love teaches you to explain away the first strange thing, then the second, then the third. Soon, he started leaving the room to answer calls. His phone would ring, and his whole expression would change. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation. "Who was that?" I asked once. "Just someone from work." Another time, I reached across the table to hand him the TV remote, and his hand shot out to move his phone farther away. It was quick, almost nothing, but I saw it. Then came the distance. Our conversations used to run late into the night. Now they ended with short answers and silence. If I talked about our anniversary, he said, "Yeah, we'll see." If I mentioned saving for a new car, he changed the subject. If I asked whether something was wrong, he kissed my forehead and told me I was overthinking. And I wanted to believe him. Then came the Wednesday that changed everything. Ethan told me he was meeting a coworker for coffee after work. Nothing unusual. He had done that before. I happened to be nearby running errands, and some foolish, hopeful part of me thought I could surprise him. Instead, I saw him outside the cafe, alone, pacing near the corner with his phone pressed tight to his ear. I stayed in my car. I didn't mean to listen, but his voice carried just enough. "It's almost ready," he said. Then, after a pause, softer, "Soon. We'll start fresh, soon." My stomach dropped so hard I gripped the steering wheel. When he came home that night, I asked, "How was coffee?" He didn't even hesitate. "Good." Mason was complaining about his girlfriend again. Same drama. He gave details, too many. He laughed in all the right places, and I sat there nodding, feeling something inside me quietly split open. A few nights later, Ethan brought up our finances. We were eating dinner, nothing special, just pasta and half-warm garlic bread, when he leaned back and said, "You know, we should really organize all our financial stuff." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "Accounts, passwords, documents, everything in one place, just in case." "Just in case of what?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Emergencies? Life? It's smart." The explanation made sense on the surface. That was the problem. Everything he said lately made sense on the surface, but underneath it, I felt the hook. 2 days later, he brought it up again while I was making lunch. "Do you know where all the account details are?" he asked casually. I set the knife down. "Ethan, why are you suddenly so interested in our finances?" His face flickered. Then he laughed. "I'm not. I just think we should be responsible." "Responsible how?" "I don't know, Nellie. Why are you making this weird?" That sentence stayed with me because I wasn't making it weird. He was. The next day, while Ethan was at work, I checked our joint account. At first, everything looked normal. Bills paid, groceries, rent, utilities. Then I noticed the transfers. Small ones, quiet ones, spread out over a few weeks. Not enough to scream theft, just enough to disappear if no one was watching. But I was watching now. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Part of me wanted to confront him immediately, to demand answers, to force the truth into the room and see what survived. But another part of me, the part that had heard "start fresh soon," told me to wait. So I called an old college friend, a lawyer named Daniel. I tried to sound calm. I failed. After I told him everything, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Nellie, I'm not saying Ethan is planning something, but you're not crazy for protecting yourself." That sentence nearly broke me, because until then, I had been hoping someone would tell me I was crazy, paranoid, dramatic, anything but right. Daniel walked me through what I could legally do. Nothing vindictive, nothing reckless, just protection. Separate accounts, documentation, asset security, a trust if necessary. When I hung up, I sat alone at my desk, staring at photos of Ethan and me from a beach trip 3 summers earlier. In the picture, he had his arms around me, chin resting on my shoulder, both of us laughing at something I couldn't even remember. I whispered, "Please don't make me do this." But deep down, I already knew. That night, while Ethan was out, I opened my laptop and began going through everything. Savings, investments, the condo paperwork. Every document felt heavier than paper should feel. I wasn't trying to destroy him. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to survive whatever storm he had already started building behind my back. Then I called my mother. "I need you to hold some things for me," I said, my voice shaking. "Just temporarily." She didn't ask for every detail. She only asked, "Are you safe?" I closed my eyes. I don't know anymore. And that was the first time I admitted it out loud. By the time Ethan came home, I had already begun the process of moving my assets into a protected trust under my mother's name. I laughed enough visible that nothing looked different, enough to keep the surface calm. Ethan walked in, kissed my cheek, and asked, "Movie tonight?" I smiled like my heart wasn't pounding. "Sure." He sat beside me on the couch, warm and familiar, while I watched the screen without seeing a single scene. Because beside me was the man I loved, and somewhere inside my laptop was proof that I no longer trusted him. The next few days felt strangely normal, too normal. After weeks of acting distant, Ethan suddenly became warmer again. He asked how my day had gone. He suggested ordering my favorite Thai food on Friday night. He even reached for my hand while we were watching television, his thumb tracing slow circles across my fingers, like nothing had ever changed. 6 months earlier, that simple gesture would have melted every worry I had. Now, it only made me wonder what he was waiting for. I kept my routine exactly the same. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. I asked about work. I kissed him goodbye every morning before he left. Meanwhile, the legal paperwork quietly moved forward. Daniel introduced me to an estate attorney who helped finalize every transfer. My savings, investment portfolio, and the condo were placed into an irrevocable family trust managed by my mother. Everything was documented, notarized, and completed well before anyone could accuse me of reacting to a breakup that hadn't happened yet. Every signature hurt. Each one felt like burying another piece of the future I thought Ethan and I would have. Still, I signed, because instinct had kept whispering the same warning for weeks. Protect yourself. Then, almost exactly 2 weeks later, it happened. It was a Friday evening. Dinner dishes were still sitting in the sink when Ethan picked up the remote and muted the television. "Nellie," he said quietly, "we need to talk." My heartbeat slowed instead of speeding up. I already knew. He folded his hands together and stared at the coffee table instead of at me. "I think we should break up." The words landed with almost no emotion, not because they didn't hurt, because I had already lived through them 100 times inside my own head. He continued speaking, his voice calm and rehearsed. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. I need space. I've lost myself. I don't know who I am anymore." Every sentence sounded polished, like lines memorized before stepping onto a stage. Then he added the one sentence that explained everything. "I've sacrificed so much for this relationship, Nellie. I deserve more than this." I looked at him carefully, not angrily, just carefully. Sacrificed? Images flashed through my mind. The promotion I declined because moving would have taken us away from his career. The weekends spent helping him prepare presentations. The vacations I postponed while he changed jobs twice. The nights I stayed awake, encouraging him whenever he doubted himself. I had never kept score. Love wasn't supposed to work that way. Yet now he was speaking as though our entire relationship had been some burden he heroically endured. "I see," I answered softly. He almost looked disappointed. Maybe he expected tears. Maybe he expected me to argue. Instead, I simply listened. "There are things I need to figure out," he continued. "Someone helped me realize I've been settling for less than I deserve." Someone. There it was again. Not a name, just someone. Someone who had apparently become more important than the woman who had spent 6 years building a life beside him. I asked only one question. "Who?" He hesitated. "A friend." "What kind of friend?" He smiled awkwardly. "Just someone who helped me see things differently." That was all. No explanation, no accountability. Just another carefully measured answer. I nodded. "If that's what you want," I said, "then we'll figure out what comes next." For the first time that evening, genuine surprise crossed his face. You're not going to fight for us?" "Fight?" I almost laughed. You can't fight for a relationship when only one person still believes it's real. "I don't think that's what you want," I replied. He didn't answer. 3 days later, a courier knocked on my office door. Inside the envelope were official separation papers. I expected legal documents. I wasn't prepared for the demands. Ethan wanted half of everything. The condo, my savings, investment accounts, my vehicle, even ongoing financial support despite earning nearly as much as I did. I flipped through each page slowly. Every request felt less like the end of a relationship and more like the execution of a business plan. Daniel read everything before looking at me. "This isn't emotional," he said quietly. "This is strategic." I already knew, but hearing someone else say it made the betrayal feel real. Instead of responding immediately, I started looking for answers. The mysterious friend. The one who had supposedly helped Ethan find himself. I checked social media. Most of his accounts were quiet, but one name kept appearing beneath photos and comments. Rachel Monroe. At first, there wasn't anything obviously inappropriate. A congratulatory comment, a laughing emoji, a photo from the same coffee shop where I'd overheard Ethan weeks earlier. Then another coincidence, And another. The same hiking trail, the same restaurant, the same weekends. Too many coincidences stop being coincidences. I called one of our mutual friends, Hannah. She sounded nervous the moment I mentioned Ethan. I really don't know much, she insisted. Has he been spending time with Rachel? Silence. I shouldn't get involved. Before hanging up, she quietly said, just be careful. The second friend, Claire, reacted almost the same way. Short answers, long pauses, then an abrupt goodbye. That evening, my phone rang again. It was Claire. I've been thinking about our conversation, she said. I don't think you deserve to be kept in the dark. She took a slow breath. Ethan's been seeing Rachel a lot. My stomach tightened. They've been meeting after work. She's been giving him advice about the separation. Advice? Claire hesitated. More like encouragement. Encouragement to do what? To make sure he doesn't settle for less than he's entitled to. Entitled. The same word Ethan had used. They hadn't simply been talking. They'd been practicing, planning, building the same narrative together. I thanked Claire before ending the call, but I still needed certainty. That weekend, I drove to Ethan's apartment after he moved out. I parked across the street where he couldn't easily see my car. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the building's front door opened. Ethan stepped outside. Rachel walked beside him. She laughed at something he said and lightly touched his arm. There was no kiss, no hand-holding. They didn't need either. The comfort between them spoke loudly enough. They climbed into her car together and drove away. I stayed exactly where I was, not crying, not shouting, just staring at the empty parking space. Every strange phone call, every conversation about money, every distant smile, every carefully rehearsed speech, every piece finally fit. Rachel hadn't simply appeared after the breakup. She had been helping write it. When I drove home that night, one thought repeated over and over inside my head. Ethan believed he had spent months preparing to take everything from me. What he didn't know was that I had been preparing just as carefully. And in a few days, when we walked into mediation, he was about to discover that his entire plan had already collapsed before he ever filed the paperwork. The mediation session began exactly the way Ethan must have imagined it would. He arrived looking calm, almost confident. Rachel wasn't there, but I had no doubt she'd help prepare him for every argument he planned to make. His attorney carried a thick binder that looked as if it contained our entire relationship, reduced to numbers and legal claims. I sat beside Daniel without saying much. My heartbeat stayed surprisingly steady. I'd already spent weeks grieving the relationship. This meeting was simply paperwork. Ethan's attorney opened first. My client is requesting an equitable division of all jointly acquired assets, he began, sliding several documents across the table, including the condominium, investment accounts, savings, retirement contributions, and vehicle ownership. He spoke as though everything had already been decided, as though I simply needed to accept reality. When he finished, Daniel calmly reached into his briefcase. Before we address those requests, he said, there are several documents everyone should review. He handed over another folder. Ethan's attorney opened it casually. Within seconds, his expression changed. His eyebrows pulled together. He turned another page. Then another. What exactly is this? Daniel answered in the same measured tone he'd used since we walked in. These documents show that Ms. Meyer legally transferred her major personal assets into an irrevocable family trust several weeks before the separation was initiated. Silence. Complete silence. Ethan leaned forward and grabbed the folder from his attorney. His eyes raced across the notarized signatures, the dates, the trust agreement, every legal filing. No, he whispered. Then louder. No, this is impossible. He looked directly at me. You planned this. I met his eyes without raising my voice. I protected myself. His face flushed red. You knew I was going to leave. I suspected something was wrong. You set me up! I shook my head. No, Ethan. I prepared. There was a difference. A very important difference. His attorney quietly asked Daniel several technical questions, each answered with another supporting document. Every transfer had been completed legally. Every deadline had been met. Every signature had been witnessed. There was nothing to challenge, nothing to reverse. The strategy Ethan had spent months building had collapsed in less than 10 minutes. He pushed his chair back. This is unbelievable. Daniel looked at him calmly. No, this is documented. The meeting ended early. There wasn't much left to negotiate. Outside the conference room, Ethan caught up with me before I reached the elevator. Nellie, I stopped. This isn't over. His voice was low now, almost pleading beneath the anger. You've destroyed everything. I looked at him for several seconds before answering. The relationship was already destroyed. You just hadn't realized I stopped being the only one paying the price. I walked away. For nearly a week, my phone barely stopped ringing. At first, the messages sounded reasonable. We should talk. We've both made mistakes. Let's work this out. When I didn't answer, they changed. You've become selfish. You embarrassed me. I can't believe you'd do this. Then suddenly, another version appeared. It wasn't supposed to go this far. One evening, he left a voicemail that made me stop walking. Nellie, the divorce wasn't even supposed to be permanent. I replayed it, twice. The next message explained even more. It was just a test. A test. I almost laughed out loud. Legal paperwork, lawyers, financial demands, months of planning. Apparently all of it had been a test. Within days, mutual friends began contacting me. Some asked whether it was true. Others repeated Ethan's newest explanation. He says he only wanted to see whether you'd fight for him. I answered every person exactly the same way. People don't hire attorneys to test relationships. Most of them never asked another question. Then everything changed because of one unexpected phone call. A mutual friend named Matthew asked if we could meet. When we sat down at a quiet cafe, he placed his phone on the table. I think you should see these. Screenshots, dozens of them. Text messages between Ethan and Rachel. I read silently. Rachel, once the settlement goes through, you'll finally have the freedom you deserve. Ethan, she'll feel guilty. She always does. Rachel, don't back down. Make her believe she owes you after everything you've sacrificed. Another message appeared. Once you get the money, we'll finally be able to start over. My hands became completely still, not because I was shocked anymore, because every doubt I'd carried for months finally disappeared. There had never been confusion. There had never been uncertainty. Only planning. Careful, patient, calculated planning. Matthew sighed. Rachel showed these messages to someone she trusted. Why? She thought they were funny. He shook his head. The wrong person saw them. Within a few days, the screenshots quietly spread through our circle of friends. Nobody needed my explanation anymore. The messages spoke for themselves. People who had defended Ethan stopped calling. Several apologized. One admitted, I honestly thought you were overreacting. Even Ethan's older sister reached out. I owe you an apology, she said quietly. I believed him. I know. I'm sorry. So am I. His attorney soon withdrew several financial claims after realizing there was no legal path forward. Without assets to pursue, the entire strategy unraveled. Then something almost predictable happened. Rachel disappeared. The woman who had promised Ethan a brand new beginning vanished almost overnight. No more encouraging messages, no more public support, no more carefully crafted advice. Apparently, a future without money wasn't the future she'd imagined. Ethan called more than 20 times over the following month. When I never answered, he started leaving voicemails again. "I'll fix this. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I don't care about the money anymore. I just want us back." Maybe he believed those words. Maybe he didn't. By then, it no longer mattered. Some betrayals don't end relationships. They end the possibility of believing the same person ever again. Months later, after the legal process was finally complete, my mother came over carrying paint samples and a toolbox. "What color are we making the guest room?" she asked with a smile. I looked around the condo. For months, it had felt haunted by memories. Now, it simply felt quiet, peaceful, safe. We spent the weekend repainting walls, rearranging furniture, donating things I no longer needed, and opening windows that had stayed closed far too long. By Sunday evening, I sat alone with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset spill across the living room floor. For the first time in nearly a year, I wasn't wondering what someone else was hiding. I wasn't checking expressions. I wasn't questioning every conversation. I wasn't waiting for another betrayal. I had protected my savings. I had protected my home. But more importantly, I had protected the part of myself that still believed intuition deserved to be trusted. Ethan became a chapter I no longer felt compelled to reread. Rachel became nothing more than a lesson wrapped in someone else's ambition. As for me, the future they tried to take had quietly remained exactly where it belonged, in my hands.